Welcome and thank you for being here today. As a reminder, please turn off your cell phones. For the record, it's Wednesday, April 8th at 2 p.m. in Macky. I'm Ellen Mahoney, and this session is 3601, and our topic today is Contacting ETs, Beware. So the Conference on World Affairs gives us a unique opportunity to think about and talk about topics we often just wonder about, like ETs. And now that the Kepler telescope is finding more and more Earth-like planets out there, many of us truly wonder, are we alone in the universe? And if we're not alone, then what? Is contact possible? So here's your chance, or big chance, to come up with some great questions for our two panelists, and I'd like to introduce them now. David Brin, to my far right, is a scientist, speaker, techie, and prolific writer. His books, such as Existence, Earth, and Star Tide Rising, give us a unique lens to contemplate our world and cosmos. You might want to check out his blog titled Contrary Brin. Seth Jones is the senior astronomer with SETI, the SETI Institute. He's the director of SETI Research. His life work has been focused on contacting ETs. He recently wrote about beaming the entire internet up into space to possibly say we are what we web. Seth was recently featured in Time magazine's The Search for Life in the Universe. Let's give them both a welcome. Our panelists will now give us a 10-minute presentation followed by a short rebuttal, or let's just see what happens. After this, we'll open the discussion for questions, keeping in mind that there are probably as many opinions on this subject as there are stars in the night sky. So let's hear from David first.
Thank you, Ellen. How great to be here in the same venue. I hate to have to follow that act from last night. How many of you were here for the jazz? I used to be able to sing, but ain't no shade. I'm dedicating my portion of this to Leonard Nimoy. So here you go, folks. And Seth and I have been in this business for 30 years. He, I think, perhaps even a little longer than that. And he's been in the front lines of the actual scientific work at the SETI Institute, using instruments like the Allen Array to search the sky for signs. I meant the sky, not this guy, for signs that there may be neighbors in our galaxy. And it's a notion that transfixes us all. Seth and I have our differences on a particular aspect of this that we've really gone toe-to-toe pretty frequently, and we'll get to that. We just had some fun on that at the AAAS about 6 weeks ago. But the fundamental thing we have in common is the notion of horizons. And this is the basic concept that really drives the hunger in our unique civilization, a civilization that's not shaped like a pyramid, like most of the feudal empires that ruled and oppressed 99% of human cultures, but a diamond-like social structure in which a well-off and empowered and curious middle class is unafraid of the rich and outnumbers the poor. But above all, the priesthood in this diamond shape, if you can use the word priesthood, wants to share their knowledge about the frontier and their excitement about the frontier. And as Michelle Thaler said here on this very stage earlier today, we don't think of ourselves as priests. We're not telling you how the world is. We're showing you the evidence. And Michelle is on TV all the time, so is Seth, so am I. This pushing back of horizons, this curiosity about what's over the hill, it manifests in our Hollywood dreams, which are the most simplistic of them all, of course. The notion of the threat horizon is represented by a type of alien. The exogamy horizon of intermarriage that was always with our ancestors when they lived in little valleys was finding somebody to kiss on the other side of the hill. So pretty aliens. That is until District 9, which challenged us to extend our horizons. Well, there's a scientific aspect to this, and NASA represents it. And one of the things worth noting is that this year it will have been 20 years since we last did not know of a planet beyond our solar system, when Jeff Marcy and his team discovered the first planet beyond our solar system. And we'll be talking about exoplanets and the potential for aliens tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. So I won't go there so much. What I'm going to talk about is the things that propel us to look and to seek. And among these horizons is the horizon of inclusion, which here in Boulder is typical of a large part of America, is almost religious to us. Find new people to include. And when we finish, and Leonard Pitts showed us that we're not, we'll move on to dolphins and chimps. There's already discussions of that, rights of higher animals. And we'll have to discuss how to make, and raise, I think is a better word, AI, artificial intelligences that think of themselves as humans and not the types of AIs that Hollywood simplistically describes, although there were a few last year that went a little more subtle, like the movie Her. And, of course, we're always invaded every year by new life forms that are barbarians called our children. And I'm sure most of you boomers like me are relieved that it's all going to be taken over by such nice people, because that's our biggest accomplishment. SETI represents this notion that there is the possibility of more beyond the hill. And as a science fiction author and as an astronomer, I've been engaged in this all my life. And I wrote a paper on this back in 1983 about what's called the Great Silence, which is now called the Fermi Paradox. And of course, you saw Seth just now roll his eyes because he denies that there is such a thing as a Fermi Paradox. And I sort of agree with him. It's not a paradox that we have not found the signs that we've been looking for. But clearly these signs are more sparse than some of the real optimists like our friend Frank Drake thought, or our friend Jill Tarter. That they thought that when they turned the antennas towards obvious places, that we would then be able to tune in either eavesdropping on the commerce or finding the great tutorial beacons that they thought that advanced life forms would be beaming out into the universe to say, you neophytes, we know you have problems. Here's a manual. And boy, couldn't we use one. But as Jill points out, just knowing that they're there would have very interesting effects upon us, both humbling and exalting. And as Guy Consolmagno will say, the Vatican and many other religions have already pre-adjusted, so that if and when this day comes, they're ready for it. And some others, religions haven't. The point is that the Fermi Paradox is about Enrico Fermi supposedly having said to his graduate students around 1945, I think it was around 1950, they were blathering about extraterrestrial life. And he said, so where are they? Where's the evidence? And I'm not just poo-pooing UFOs. Heck, 100% of chance that maybe some of the sightings might be little silver guys in spaceships. They're just not intelligent life. Look at their behavior. Or other notions, like for instance, I think Seth will talk about the possibility that they're already in our solar system in the form of self-replicating probes. And my most recent novel, Existence, goes into that in great detail, and we can talk about that. But the question that the Earth itself was a great laboratory. 2 billion years ago, it became an ideal place for colonization when it got an oxygen-rich atmosphere. And yet we see no signs in our rocks, not only of civilizations here, but the results of a toilet being flushed, because it would have changed life on Earth. So this absence puts a burden on the discussions, and it all revolves around Frank Drake's famous equation. How many of you have seen it? The Drake equation, which attempts to say, all right, the number that are out there is proportional to the number of planets. Well, that's gone up. The fraction that develop life, it seems more likely every year from the laboratories, but we're not, it still might take a miracle, probably not. The fraction of living planets that engender intelligent life, the fraction of those that develop technological life, the fraction of those that live long enough to then expand and be noticeable, the fraction of those that decide to colonize, because that changes the numbers. If you've got 10,000 places where the civilization exists, rather than just the one they came from. And here's the interesting thing, and then I'll shut up. The theory that you come up with for why we haven't made contact depends on which of these things you choose to repress. And those who say that the great filter is behind us, they say that life is less likely. They say that intelligence is less likely, or technology is less likely. But now that we have all those things, the sky is open to us. And that explains why life is rare, civilizations appears to be rare out there. Others say that the pitfall that reduces the numbers is ahead of us. They are foolish with nuclear war. They are foolish with their environment. Or starships are impossible, or that sort of thing. And so Frank's equation, which he never meant to be used this way, is the landscape upon which we discuss this interesting question. And Seth will answer this simple question, the question of where are they, by saying, we'll discover them tomorrow.
So let's hear from Seth.
I hope it's not tomorrow, because I'll be here. Do they have any direct flights to Stockholm? I want to collect my check. All right. Listen, I'm going to get to the controversy here, because David's given an excellent explication of the background of SETI, but, you know, you've had that. So I'm going to get to the controversy, because otherwise we could have had a chamber music ensemble up here on the stage, and you would have been happier. All right, and here it is. We've been doing SETI for a long time. Dave's already mentioned that. It's been a half century since the first experiments, and we haven't found anything yet, and I think the reason for that is we've hardly sampled any of the galaxy yet, but that's a different story. Let me just say this, though. There's no controversy about listening for ET. Very few people consider that dangerous, because obviously the aliens don't know you picked them up in case you do, right? You're driving into work tomorrow, and you tune in KGNU. You don't have to worry that the guy in the station there is going to jump into the car and start molesting you, because he doesn't know you tuned him in. All right, so that's not an issue. The issue is that there are some people, there's several groups now, I just learned about another one 2 weeks ago, that are interested in turning the tables a little bit, and let's broadcast into space, not just sit around with our earphones, not that we use those, sit around with our earphones, you know, looking bored silly, waiting for ET to call. Okay, now, you might say, well, wait a minute, why are you talking about that? That's been done before, too, and it has. In 1974, there was a 3-minute message sent from the big antenna down in Puerto Rico, okay? But since then, the Canadians had several messages. I don't know what antenna they used, but presumably it was laid back. A guy in Russia by the name of Alexander Zaitsev has been transmitting all sorts of things using an antenna in the Ukraine. There's been a Doritos advertisement broadcast to the aliens. I don't know if it's increased sales. There's been an entire Hollywood feature broadcast, and in 2008, NASA used one of the Goldstone antennas in Southern California to broadcast a Beatles song to the North Star. Now, the North Star is roughly 450 light years away, so it'll be 900 years before we hear whether they want more Beatles or they want Buddy Holly. Okay, now, and I haven't even mentioned the greeting cards we bolted on the sides of some of our spacecraft, like, you know, the Voyager record and the Pioneer plaque and all that sort of thing. In fact, never mind. Okay, so why is this now a controversy, this idea that you might want to initiate contact? Well, It's, I think, a controversy because today, Mr. and Mrs. Front Porch from Loveland recognize there are thousands of planets we've found. 1 in 5 stars may have a planet similar to Earth, a planet worthy of building condos on, and maybe there's some aliens there. So if you broadcast into space, now it's conceivable there's somebody on the other end. And they might be friendly and they might just send us all their poetry. But on the other hand, you don't know that, right? And that is a legitimate point. People ask me about what the aliens are going to be like all the time. I have to tell you that our knowledge of alien sociology is very sparse, okay? All right, but why would anybody want to broadcast? Because the stars they're talking about are probably far away, 10 light years, 100 light years, 1,000 light years. You know, you broadcast something to a star system 1,000 light years. Hi, we're the Earthlings, you want to join our book club. It takes 1,000 years to get there, and if they deign to reply, that's another 1,000 years. 2,000 years have gone by, your funding is probably gone. Your personal interest is certainly evaporated. So why do it? Well, to begin with, you might provoke a response. Particularly broadcast to nearby stars, then maybe it'll happen in your lifetime. That would be job security for me, obviously, but you know, that's the ostensible reason. But I think that the more important reasons are 2 other things. One is you might learn something about how to listen, because now you've walked a mile in the Klingon shoes, as it were. You know how difficult it is to broadcast a signal that might be picked up, so you might do better in your listening experiments. And the third thing, and I think this is actually, I think there's something to this, it gives humanity 2 projects. One is to decide, you know, we want to do this. I don't know how we do that, but maybe there's some way to do that. And secondly, what should we say? Let humanity decide who's going to speak for Earth. And the third thing is it actually gives you something to look forward to, right? Can you imagine the news story 40 years from now? Well, you know, our messages to Vega have had enough time to get there and for them to respond, so, you know, watch out for something on the news upcoming. Well, I mean, that's like, you know, building or burying a time capsule, right? It might pay off. It might be something interesting, and it gives people something to do in terms of deciding what should go in it. So I think that's okay. But there's this problem of the danger. So there are 2 aspects that have to be decided if anybody's going to do this. And one is obviously, should we do it? Get back to that in a moment. And the first thing is, if we do it, what do we say? Eleanor's already alluded to my take on that. We could send more greeting cards, but that's crazy. If you're going to talk to some society that's going to take hundreds of years before you get an answer, let's send a lot of stuff, right? Don't say, hey, you want to join our book club, and then, they, you know, 1,000 years later, could you please repeat that? I mean, it's going to be a bummer. So looking at the historical analogy with how we decoded the hieroglyphics, one thing that really helped, aside from the Rosetta Stone, of course, but one thing that really helped was the fact that there was this enormous corpus of hieroglyphics in Egypt, because Egypt's dry, it's like California. So you could find all this stuff, all right, and that would help. So that's why I say send the internet. A lot of people say, but there's porn on the internet. Well, I don't think the aliens will care about that. Okay, so as terms of what we should do, that's what I think we should send, but you know, everybody can have their own idea. We can you know, somehow decide that amongst us. But the really emotional issue, right, the one that gets David's hair standing on end and mine is, should we do it, right? That wasn't a reference. Okay. Should we do it? And my bottom line on this is, it really doesn't matter whether we do it or not. I'm not rushing to the telescopes to do this, but there are some people who would like to do that, and I have no problem with that. Because if you're going to worry about the danger, and you can, if you feel that you need one more worry in your life, if this is one that comes to the top of the list somehow, in which case you should probably see somebody, it's too late. We've been doing it. We have, since the Second World War, had high-powered, high-frequency transmitters, and now I'm talking about television, FM radio, and most visibly radar, that's been going out into space for 70 years. And you might say, yeah, but those are very weak signals. That's true. They are weak signals, and any deliberate broadcast would be much stronger where the aliens are. That's right. But you know, I've worked the numbers, and it's 2 or 3 orders of magnitude too weak for us to find with our equipment today. But any aliens that could threaten you, any aliens that could watch those early I Love Lucy episodes, decide they don't like Fred Mertz's jokes, and consequently the planet should be destroyed, any civilization that can launch interstellar battle wagons in our direction, they're ahead of us technologically. Not by 10 years, at least hundreds of years, maybe thousands of years. And it's very easy to show that they will have antennas a little bit bigger than ours, not a whole heck of a lot. I have to say that I looked up the Denver airport has a radar, of course. It has an ASR-11, I believe. That's just, for air traffic control in the vicinity of the airport. And it puts out a peak power, equivalent power of 25 kilowatts. The amount of power it actually takes is the same as your oven. Doesn't take a lot of power, but it puts out 25 kilowatts. I did the numbers to save you the tedious math, but it turns out that you could find, if you had an antenna such as the Chinese are building now, which is about 10 times the collecting area of that one in Puerto Rico, you could find that thing in an hour of observation. You find the Denver airport, and the Denver airport is sweeping the horizon nonstop, 24/7, and because it's sweeping the horizon, because the Earth rotates, a fact many of you are aware of, that means that it's sweeping, 2/3 of the universe is listening to the Denver airport for about 5 minutes a day, okay? Not interesting programming. All right, so finally, let me just say, the idea that we should tell people, don't broadcast into space, it's dangerous, I think it's bad policy. The reason I think it's bad policy is, A, it's unenforceable. Who's going to enforce that? Hey, Bob, you got a transmitter there, and you aimed it up, we're going to take you in, right? I mean, UN isn't interested in this issue, so I don't know who would enforce that, and I don't think you ought to have policies that are completely unenforceable. It's like saying, robbing banks is a bad idea. Let's put out a petition, don't rob banks. I mean, that's charmingly naive and also ineffective. But my real point is this: if you restrict what people can do in terms of sending signals to the sky, that really cripples our descendants. They will not be able to build the big radars that would be necessary in case we colonize something out there. They will not be able to use the big radars to track all the long-period comets that otherwise could ruin your whole day. That's a real danger. I think the aliens are not.
One of the reasons I like this man is I don't have to pretend that I have a space that I have to fill. Brilliant. Of course, I also think extremely wrong-headed. Let me point out a couple of words for you to look up, though. The Cosmic Haystack. That's basically a metaphor that Jill, I think, came up with, or did it predate her, to Frank? And that is the notion of you're searching for a needle in the cosmic haystack. And every year that the instruments that they use get better, then the box of frequency domain of ever smaller sections of the sky that they're sweeping across the sky. What's a third axis? Well, there are axes to the box. Yeah, they're about 10 dimensions, but it can be illustrated with 3, and you can see where the searches have been. And certainly we have searched the sky vastly more than we had 30 years ago when we were having this conversation, orders and orders of magnitude more. And the only thing that we can absolutely say is that there don't seem to be any of these tutorial beacons blaring out into space. And we've already shown mathematically that these seem to be a very unlikely way that elder races would try to help younger races anyway. So yes, absolutely, the search must continue. Although, let me poke at just one thing that Seth said. Well, I'll poke at a few others. That listening cannot conceivably be dangerous. Well, that's not true. There are conceivable ways by which viral communication can infect a local computer, and if it has self-correcting code, then that very self-correcting mechanism for the code can help it to embed and become what we call a worm or a virus. Do I consider this to be an extremely high likelihood? Of course not. And Seth has, fortunately, revised what he used to say about my fears of face-ripping aliens and slathering Cardassian invaders. I finally got him to stop saying that. The point is that yes, as a science fiction author, it's my job to look at all those horizons I mentioned. And some of them are dangerous, and some of them are dangerous in nice, tasty ways that can drive a plot. So that's my business. There are others that involve the possibility of commensal symbiotic relationships with those out there. But the main thing is that we're like the very, very, very young youngster, the youngest in the galaxy, almost totally by logic, with technological powers. Imagine a 4-year-old who finds herself in a jungle that's quiet, maybe too quiet. Well, all right, that's an over-dramatization, but the fact of the matter is if there's so many aliens out there and they're being quiet, maybe they know something we don't know. This is not the main point, though. The main point that we raise is that there's a process by which you settle disagreements like ours over risk. There's a new science of risk assessment that is getting better and better. And when you insist, when a small coterie of zealots, perhaps a dozen on this planet, arrogate to themselves the right to concoct the message and to beam outward yoo-hoo on our behalf, it is our right to say, could we talk it over first? Looking back across the last couple thousand years, we have documented a number of cases of first contact between technologically advanced and technologically less advanced civilizations. Who can name for me one that happened without great pain, especially for the less technologically advanced? We are hoping to have a major discussion, one that would last maybe 5 years, one that would automatically attract a lot of TV attention, perhaps a viewership of 500 million people, because the topic is so intrinsically fascinating. You're in this room because it is. And the number of factors just in the Drake equation itself, each could be a notion for an entire series of television episodes, let alone just one. The fraction of planets that would develop life, what it means to become intelligent, and what are the odds that we might be replicated elsewhere. So many people leap to conclusions in this area, which is the only great scientific topic without any subject matter. I mean, Stephen Hawking, of all brilliant people, declared that he was opposed to beaming because aliens would come for our resources and kill us for them. Personally, I think that's way down there on the possibility list. Seth and I are in agreement that it's likely that the stars would be pervaded by autonomous probes that would go from star to star, investigate the solar system, find out if anything interesting is there, beam some information back to a maker species that may or may not still exist, and then make 100 copies of themselves out of asteroidal resources, cast them onward. Do you know how long it would take to fill the galaxy with those? 3 million years, an eye blink. We could do it ourselves in our biological selves in 60 million years, which makes the Fermi paradox even more puzzling, because now we're not just talking about searching for isolated cases across the sky, but also their colonies. So
excuse me, David.
Yeah.
Could we
move to questions? Look, the point is, all right, I'll go bullet points very quickly. Number one, let humanity side. Absolutely. That's what we've been asking for, and that's what Seth's been evading. And that is a long-term discussion that brings in other people than just a dozen zealous radio astronomers. Are we already known out there? That's called the barn door excuse. The horses have already left, and it is utterly absurd. To show you the comparison of the difference, there's a Boy Scout camp across a half-a-mile lake. You want to communicate with them. Our noisiest era on Earth, the 1980s, was like you going to the shore of the lake and slapping the surface of the water to get attention from those Boy Scouts. Now you whip out a laser pointer and aim it at them. That is the order of magnitude difference between the Doritos ads and all those other things and what Seth wants to do. Now, sending the internet. Personally, perhaps we should get them to keep it. We were about to make contact with you, but now, never mind. We should tune SETI to look for 140 characters. But here's the most fundamental aspect to this that shows that these guys are not willing to discuss trade-offs. They have their own idea. And we've seen in movies and in real life what happens when a dozen scientists are sure they've got it sussed. And that is, What are we going to trade if we make contact? The only thing that we know can transmit between the stars is culture. And Seth wants to give all of it away as free samples. Oh, geez, these free samples are cool. They're great. Thanks a lot. Now, you say you're interested in Encyclopedia Galactica? Okay, now what do you have left to trade? Nothing.
Okay, thank you. Seth, what do you have to say to that?
I'm not going to say much, except to note that the internet doubles more or less every year. So you just wait 5 years, send it again, and they get a whole new set of stuff. By the way, I must defend radio astronomers. They're not the ones who actually are interested in doing this, but to call them zealots, I think they would take that as a compliment. I wish some of them were a little more in the realm of being zealots. But I personally think we should go to questions because I want to hear what you have to say. I know what we say.
So, okay, great. So just step up to the mic with questions, and we would like to hear from students first, and we'll go back and forth. So would you like to take on the first question, please?
Certainly. I've heard a lot of talk about extraterrestrial life, and I'm really curious about the potential for extra-dimensional life instead, how we might go about encountering them. From you.
I think the problem is, and I get phone calls, people talk about extra-dimensional life, and I kind of hanker for it myself, but I don't know what it means. You know, if you can tell me what it means, you know, it's like people say, the aliens won't be using electromagnetic radiation, you know, light and radio waves to communicate. They'll be using hyperspace communication because they've been watching Star Trek. But I don't know what it is, and the physicists don't know what it is either, so you can't build the equipment. So there's the problem. If you can define what it is, then you can probably think of a way to prove whether it exists or not.
As a science fiction author, of course, I'm very familiar with a wide variety of speculative notions of parallel universes is one. The M theory, the brains, B-R-A-N-E-S, that might exist next to our metagalaxy, our reality. These might leave signs in our world. But again, as St. Carl, our pal, said, extraordinary claims demand extraordinary evidence. So as a science fiction author, I'm willing to utilize these things as thought experiments, Gedanken experiments, using the prefrontal lobes, and I applaud you for that. But we have to have a sliding scale of those things that we look at. And I mean, one example of what you're talking about is whether or not we're living in a simulation. And let's test it. I want you all to wave at that wall at our descendants in the 26th century who are simulating this great event. Go on. This is the part I love. Bryn has them waving at the wrong wall.
Okay, go ahead.
So, David, if you don't think, or you're kind of afraid to do this, what possible reason might an ET take for wanting to destroy us? I mean, they don't want to come and get our world's supply of praseodymium, for instance. What might they be after us for? To snuff us out before we become too strong?
Well,
what are you thinking?
For one thing, this is not what propels the several dozen of Seth's peers who have resigned from SETI commissions, who have signed petitions of protest, who are part of a very large group that includes the original planetary hunter Jeff Marcy, Elon Musk, Dan Wertheimer, a federal judge, a large number of people who are asking for a moratorium to do the proper scientific vetting of this attempt to alter one of Earth's fundamental observable properties without an environmental impact statement. That is 99%. Now, if you ask me, as a science fiction author, to rank order the thousands of possible ways and reasons that aliens might want to come and go, I could come up with a dozen that are not impossible. And the biggest one you mentioned, and that is elimination of future competition. And by the way, it's easy to do. You just aim a space probe to where the Earth will be and send it at 10% of the speed of light.
It's going to be bad on the probe. I think that the questioner raises a good point, though, because there really isn't much that we have that they don't have there, and they can save the shipping. okay? In terms of natural resources, all that's been looked at. A lot of people have thought a lot about what is it that Earth has, right? And what we have is indeed the culture. That's special, but you don't destroy a culture to study it, right? You can study it without destroying it.
Thanks. I think the answer to that might be metals and minerals, because they would obviously need that.
They have those at home. The metals and minerals they have everywhere, yeah.
Well, they might use them up. But anyway, I was wondering if you guys could speak to kind of our ignorance in regards to evidence that we already have of extraterrestrials, like, dare I say, crop circles, or things like that. I mean, that's kind of, I don't know, but yeah, so there's evidence out there of extraterrestrials, and
Yes, but not intelligent life.
not intelligent life, but
Look at their behavior.
We fail to think that another planet could be, hundreds of thousands of years more advanced than ours, or even millions of years more advanced than ours,
And that they
us
want to do
sending
anal
light
probes.
waves. What?
And they want to do anal probes.
No, I mean, if you really think that a kid's going to be out in a field with, a stick and a board creating incredibly geometrical
I've
patterns.
seen guys do it.
All right.
Let me just address this, because I deal with this every day, and I have respect for your point of view, because the people who call me, and they call me every day. This morning I got 2 emails from people who've seen things. 1/3 of the American population thinks that indeed they are here, not just there. Okay, so it's not a fringe thing, and the people that call me are not making stuff up, they're not liars, and they're not mentally imbalanced. Okay, these are legitimate calls. The thing is, they've seen something they don't understand, and the difficulty here for science is just because you didn't understand it doesn't mean automatically that your interpretation of what it is correct. Okay, and the fact that you have 20 Air Force pilots and a bunch of astronauts and so forth all testifying that they've seen things, and that happens every year, the National Press Club in Washington, that's called an argument from authority. You ought to believe it because this person who's an authority told you it was true. Now that's often a good argument, because if your doctor tells you something, probably you should listen to that. Or climate change. But if you're talking about the fact that an Air Force pilot saw something and he can identify extraterrestrial craft, that's not good enough. It's, like witness testimony in a murder trial. It's very unreliable. So I think that this is the thing that I tell people who call me about this and, want my opinion. What you need is better evidence. Evidence that's good enough to stack up in the Smithsonian, and you'll have the attention of 98% of the academics in the world.
And I totally agree with Seth, which of course shocks me, but the fact that every year, it's a corollary to Moore's Law. Every year the cameras get smaller, faster, cheaper, vastly more numerous, more mobile, at a rate faster than Moore's Law. So how come these things keep staying fuzzy? I mean, your photos from the 1950s and 60s and 70s, now there would be someone standing under that thing where you took its picture. And back then, odds were that person didn't have a camera in her pocket. Now, she does. So if they do exist, and I'm a sci-fi author, I don't totally denigrate that notion. Well, I do, mostly, but if they are, then they are purposely keeping back at a calibrated rate that our cameras are increasing. In which case, I often say this on radio. When I get a call-in show, I say, oh, the aliens are listening, right? Yeah. Up yours. Send your parents.
Okay, these are great questions. Go ahead.
All right. My question's related to all the others, I guess, and ideas brought up in the Matrix. What if we label, so we may need to free our minds a bit, but what if what we want to call aliens are simply unseen entities or life forms that have figured out technologically or evolved in a certain sort of way to be able to feed off the energetic pattern that a human being gives off naturally? Say when 2 people fall in love, or when somebody drinks alcohol or something like that. Like, could they be here right now feeding off us or harvesting our energy that we give off willy-nilly?
I love Boulder.
Thanks for that.
Okay, fair enough. But again, I mean, the idea that the aliens are coming here to feed off, the love affairs of Homo sapiens, I find that a novel idea, actually. maybe literally for you, David. But again, you know, it's easy enough to have the idea. The question is, can you think of a way to prove that it's true or that it's not true? Then it becomes science. And if you can't think of that, then it's a story. And it's like saying, you know, those hyperdimensional beings are having a great party in here, wouldn't you like that? In the 10th, 11th, and 12th dimensions, but since you cannot build any equipment to see the 10th, 11th, and 12th dimensions, you're just going to miss the party. Okay, it's not a very interesting discussion. And actually, it's one of the reasons that it's one of the things I find interesting about the UFO phenomenon. It's been more than 60 years, right, since Roswell, the aliens come who knows how many trillions of miles to visit the land of enchantment because they're enamored of Tex-Mex cuisine, and then the last 50 feet they make a navigational error and crash into the dirt. Okay, now you can believe that or not, but if they are here, you've got to say they are the best house guests ever. They don't interfere with your daily lives. They don't kill anybody. They don't solve our problems. They don't, you know, mess up the traffic at the international airport here. Nothing. They're just occasionally they'll abduct you for these unauthorized experiments that might improve your social life.
And besides which, in recent years, they've all got licenses as proctologists.
Okay, next question.
Thank you.
Hi. Unfortunately, I got here quite recently, so very likely you've already addressed this, but given the many probabilities to multiply, such as the probability of there being a Jupiter to deflect asteroids, to prevent collisions with Earth, and given also the what I assume are random mutations, many of which have occurred over the last 500 million years to get to us. What is the probability of there being anything else? And the other question is related, is if there is something out there that we could communicate, what about the problem of maybe many light years distance and such that it would take a while to get an answer to what one has to say?
Well, the second thing we've already addressed a little bit. You know, it's not going to be snappy conversation if you find somebody. That's obvious. But as far as the first question, that's just one of the big questions that nobody has an answer to. What is the probability that if I give you 1 million planets like the Earth, with large liquid oceans, water's best, and thick atmospheres, and you let them cook for 4 billion years, what fraction of them will ever cook up something as clever as boulderites, right? And the answer to that question is, we don't know the answer to that question, right? We have a sample of one, so we don't know. But that's why this is not traditional science where you try and falsify an hypothesis. It's exploration, where you're trying to say, it's not unreasonable to assume we're not a miracle. You should probably assume that. Your parents have been telling you you're a miracle ever since you were born, so you have a natural predilection to believe that. But in fact, if you do a little bit of exploration, at least you have the hope that you might prove that what's happened here has happened in an analogous way in many other places.
And we're all in favor of exploration. What we're in favor of is doing the processes of science that have been so good for us. And yes, including discussing dangers that might accrue from things we have no examples of. And one example of this is NASA's Planetary Protection Office, which is very soberly tries to minimize the danger that of which we have no example. The danger of infecting another planet or being infected by another planet. This is what grown-ups do.
So I'm very sorry, we just have time for one more quick question. And then if you'd like to hear Seth and David speak again tomorrow at 9 a.m. in the UMC, 9 a.m. Go ahead.
Have you seen any works of science fiction that could have accurate or valid depictions, ways of contacting, or theories of extraterrestrials?
Oh, many. The high end of science fiction has a lot of Gedanken experiments, thought experiments, about what may seem plausible according to our best science, examples of encounter. In my latest novel, Existence, there's a discussion of a dozen different types of self-replicating probes that we might find in the asteroid belt. The best science fiction ever to come out of Asia was just translated into English this year by Tor Books. It's called The Three-Body Problem by Liu Cixin, and it is light years ahead of anything I've ever seen come out of Asia. It's spectacular, first rate. Will probably win the Hugo Award this year, and it's about such contact.